This is E Wing of Wandsworth Prison. It's hardly changed since the 1870s. But a huge refit is about to bring it into line with the 21st century. And that work will mean that a notorious part of the history of this famous prison will have gone forever, the site of the gallows. Because if you were convicted of a capital offence in London, south of the Thames, between 1878 and 1961, this is where you'd be sent to be hanged. And it was Wandsworth that saw the last gallows in England and Wales. Executions of criminals used to be a public spectacle. But in the 1860s, the capital punishment within prisons law was passed, and the deed was confined to places like this. The last public execution was on the 26th of May, 1867, at Newgate. The first execution here was on the 8th of October, 1878. A black flag was hoisted above the prison gates, and the prison bell tolled. Crowds gathered outside. What exactly happened to the condemned men and women inside these walls was always shrouded in some secrecy. Strict procedures, the so-called execution protocols, were introduced to formalise the final moments of the traitors, murderers and spies who were sent here. This used to be the condemned person's cell, where they spent their last days. Mick Lydon is the longest-serving member of staff at Wandsworth. He started as a guard in the 1960s and has spent his entire working life in the prison service. Now, where we are now is where the condemned guy would live in the days preceding his execution.
Indeed, yeah. There was a series of rooms, there was bathrooms, there was kitchens. At the far end there was a visiting room because they had their visits separate to anybody else.
And would they be observed the whole time?
Oh yes, 24 hours a day. The system, as I understand it, ran that staff would be brought in from other prisons so they didn't actually know the prisoner involved. I only have actually met two staff in my entire career, going back about 36 years. One I knew in Liverpool who told me he used to come to Wandsworth whenever there was an execution. He was open to admitting that, but would never ever describe the situation. And one guard, known for 20-odd years, only actually told me after his retirement that he was one of the staff involved that used to do the job.
Well, look after the condemned man.
To stay with the condemned man.
What the condemned man would not know was that his cell was connected to his place of execution. Just the other side of this wall was the gallows. The doorway is now bricked up. You can just see its outline in the plaster. It's all a bit of a grisly business, isn't it?
A very grisly business. I'm not sure that I could do it. I'm not sure I could be involved in it.
One of the few times condemned prisoners did get out of the condemned cell was to attend a church service here in the prison chapel. But because they weren't allowed any contact with any other prisoner, they were hidden away behind what would have been grills, just over there. So this is the dreaded room itself, Stuart, is it?
Yes, this is the execution cell, where you had the crossbeam, which is in the cell above, and the trapdoors, pretty much where we're standing here now.
Prison officer Stuart McLaughlin has written about the history of the prison and its role in capital punishment. The gallows were removed in 1992, but the execution room is still a chilling place. One of the original hangman's ropes still remains, although it's thought this one was never used in an execution. And Stuart also has some remarkable and dramatic evidence of what went on here. Just before the gallows were finally removed from Wandsworth, Stuart, with full permission of the prison authorities, filmed for posterity one of the regular operational checks on the equipment.
That's the gallows itself, and it's rigged for a single execution. There's a test bag.
It's probably the only film of a working prison gallows ever taken in this country, since cameras, of course, were never normally allowed in the execution room.
And the trapdoors going down.
Who were some of the famous, or should I say infamous, people who died on this spot?
Well, I think probably the first infamous one would have been a prisoner by the name of George Chapman. He was executed in 1903, and he was a very strong candidate for having been Jack the Ripper. In fact, George Aberline, who was the lead detective on the ground for the Ripper case, actually said to a colleague, "Oh, you've caught Jack the Ripper at last."
Really?
He still remains a candidate for having been Jack the Ripper, having been in Whitechapel at the time, although when he was executed in 1903, he'd actually been poisoning his wives, and he was subsequently found, caught, and ended up on the Wandsworth gallows.
What about later?
Later, we had the Nazi propaganda broadcaster William Joyce, known to his listeners as Lord Haw Haw. He died here on 3rd of January 1946.
But possibly the most infamous case was that of Derek Bentley. It was cases such as Bentley's that helped finally bring about the abolition of capital punishment and the final removal of the gallows here. Although he was unarmed, he was sentenced to death because his accomplice shot and killed a policeman. In 1998, the Court of Appeal quashed his original conviction and granted a full posthumous pardon, 45 years after he was hanged in this room.
It does actually show that, yeah, the Wandsworth gallows certainly did take the life of one innocent man.
Now, capital punishment was abolished in the 1960s, but the gallows here remained until the 90s.
Yes.
Why was that?
It was decided in the 60s, even though the law that abolished capital punishment was, in theory, only suspended it for 5 years. But in that 5-year period, all gallows were dismantled and removed, apart from the one at Wandsworth. It was deemed that it would be good to retain at least one working gallows for the remaining capital crimes. Also, Wandsworth was the prison that stored all execution equipment. So if another prison in the country was going to have an execution, Wandsworth was to send the kit out by train.
Now, this whole area is being renovated, isn't it? What will happen to this bit of the story?
Well, that's right. E-wing on this main part of the prison remains the only wing that has not undergone full refurbishment. So the plan is that the wing will be sealed off and everything that you see here now will be removed, and it will be a thoroughly modern cell area, or this may be given over to classroom.
So no remains whatsoever of the gallows?
You'll not be able to see any after the refurbishment.
So this is the last time, really?
This will be the last time.
Where all those condemned goes to?
Yeah, although you'd have any appreciation of what took place here.
No one's been hanged in England since 1964, and the death penalty was officially abolished in 1998. And soon the scene of Wandsworth Prison's part in the story of capital punishment will also be history.